All right. Thank you, everybody, for coming. For those who don't know me, I'm Michael Mancini, Vice President of Strategy and COO. I want to welcome everyone to University Day. I think this is our third, fourth, fifth. I don't know. It's one of ours. But it's really great to do this in person again. And we have a really great speaker today, so I'm not going to take up any time. So I'm going to invite now Moira Walsh to come up, who's a co-chair of the New Jersey State Library and Thomas Edison State University Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council, who's co-sponsoring the event today along with the AI Task Force. So, Moira?
Thank you. Hello, everyone. It's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Hancock, the president of Thomas Edison State University. There are two things I think everyone should know and appreciate about Dr. Hancock. She's committed to fostering diversity, equity, and inclusion in our university, whether it be for students, staff, hiring, or programming. She always sets a thoughtful example and actually started our DEI Council. This enabled us to learn more and share more while creating opportunities for our community and beyond. The second thing is her availability and commitment to being a president that cares and keeps in touch. If you haven't attended one of her fireside chats yet, sign up right away. You'll be impressed with how she shares her ideas about the university and its direction, and sincerely invites your input as well in a relaxed and engaging atmosphere. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Hancock.
Well, thank you, Maura. That was very, very sweet. I'm thrilled that we have Edison Day, whichever iteration it is. I think folks remember we started looking for opportunities to engage in kind of academic, thought-provoking discussions. And I think Michael and team did a great job of saying, hey, the day we became a university, that's a cool day, let's grab that. So we grabbed it with Edison Day, and have been bringing in speakers and hopefully kind of, getting people to stretch their brains every year since then. Before I start, I do want to introduce somebody who probably nobody knows, but if it's possible in a university to have somebody who's a student and your boss all at the same time, David Chatfield is our student trustee. So David, can you kind of wave your hand? who is here joining us. So it's my privilege to introduce Dr. Rogers. We go back a ways, and one thing I was saying, we just had lunch earlier, so there's this front row here kind of got the cheating prequel a little bit to our speaker. And we're talking a bit that when you hit a certain point in your career, you realize one of the biggest assets you have is this collection of people you know, and you get to follow what they do and see the exciting things they do. And so I was sharing the idea that Michael and I, starting tomorrow, will start thinking about, hey, who should the University Day speaker be next year? And so one day I was on LinkedIn and I was following some of the exciting things that Rhianna was doing, and we've worked together in the past. And I sent her to Michael and said, Michael, Rhianna. So that's what started here. And it just got even better because we had this conversation probably about 9 months ago. And it just started going more as we looked at diversity, as we've looked at what we're doing, as we looked at our commitment to access to equity, to making sure every student, every staff member is supported and successful, and to what we're trying to do with AI and how we're trying to think out of the box. It became kind of really fortuitous that we'd identified Rhianna early because it became a better and better speaker. So I'm going to read exactly from my notes because I don't want to get this wrong on a little bit of her background. Dr. Rogers is a distinguished leader in digital equity and public policy research with a career that spans over two decades, in federal, academic, and nonprofit sectors. Most recently, she served the Biden-Harris administration as a Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and Accessibility Officer. Excuse me. Now, where was I? And counselor to the Assistant Secretary for Management at the U.S. Department of the Treasury. Dr. Rogers was recognized in October of 24 with a gold medallion from the Department of Education Office of the Inspector General for her contributions. I don't know, this may have been yours, but it's mine now. Sorry about that. let me start again. She was recognized in October of 24 with this gold medallion from the Department of Education, Office of the Inspector General, for her contributions to AI policy, digital equity, and education. A former tenured professor, an experienced academic, and public speaker, Dr. Rogers has presented at high-profile events, all second to this one, including 3 times as the United Nations Geneva Forum. And did I hear that you were just invited back again? So make that almost 4 times. 2 times at TEDx, at the U.S. Treasury, and at Google. She's an independent researcher and former director at the RAND Center to Advance Racial Equity and Policy. Dr. Rogers is more than a colleague to me. She's the epitome of a lifelong learner. From her roots as an expert in cultural and ethnic studies to her renowned and constantly growing work in DEI, AI, and technology. She's an amazing sort of inspiration. I expect that after this you might have about 20 more requests on LinkedIn to follow you, because there are a lot of exciting things and a lot of exciting links on her page. In today's presentation, Dr. Rogers will explore issues that affect the crossroads between society and higher education and highlight the ways that technology can be a driving force of innovation and social inequities. Dr. Rogers.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hancock, and thank you, everybody, for being here today. I will tell you, I probably have had about 5 cups of coffee because I'm on California time. So I will try to slow myself down, but I have no promises. Well, as you just heard from Dr. Hancock, we will be exploring, as you see on the title slide here, the transformative possibilities of technology in higher education. And I'm going to be looking at interdisciplinary case studies from my work. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself, and then we'll kind of move into the presentation. I always jokingly say this, I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up, so I'm a little bit of everything. I truly do look at myself as a lifelong learner. My doctorate is in interdisciplinary studies before it was cool, and it's in anthropological archaeology, history, and linguistics. I have a separate master's degree in museum studies and public history. So I really wanted, and if you look at my background, to understand people. That was really what I wanted to do. I've had a really wonderful pleasure of teaching in a variety of places. I speak multiple languages. I speak German and Spanish as well. I used to work for the Mexican government at the Institución Nacional de Antropología y Historia, which is the National Institute of Anthropology and History. I taught for 6 years in Lebanon. I taught in Beirut. I've literally taught in Cyprus. I've taught in the Dominican Republic. And all of these kind of global experiences that I have really shaped me into the individual that I am today, and why I'm so passionate, and you're going to see this through the presentation, about finding ways to connect with people. So connecting with all of you. And I hope you take advantage of the Q&A at the end. I will give you lots and lots of information. And please do connect with me after. Now, I want you to know that we're going to be exploring the themes of digital equity and looking at it through an interdisciplinary lens. As I said, I've had the privilege of not only working in the federal government under the Biden-Harris administration, but I've also worked in state government, where I worked under the former President Cuomo, and I've also worked in tribal government. So I used to work for the Seminole Tribe of Florida as the tribal archaeologist. These are very different experiences. I've also taught at 5 different universities. So these are really interesting ways to connect, because it's in different states, different countries, and it's used different forms of technology. So as we go a little bit further, how do I get into digital culture? I told you I'm an archaeologist. I tell you I'm a linguist. That doesn't have anything to do with technology. Well, I'll tell you, archaeology is very different than what probably you think of when you think of Indiana Jones, though I love him. I will tell you, my friends threw me a party as Indiana Rhianna. So I actually have a poster that has my face glued on top of his. It's wonderful. But I will tell you, it's not that. It's not Tomb Raider, if you're younger, Lara Croft. Archaeology really is an interdisciplinary field that requires you to use hard science. This country is the only country that places archaeology under anthropology. Every other country, including Canada and Mexico, it's a separate hard science. So when I was going to school, I actually had to study really hard sciences: geomorphology, geology, computer science. And so what you're seeing here is how I got into this. This is 2007 when I was working with the Seminole Tribe of Florida. There's a field of study called archaeometry, which is the intersection of archaeology and computer science. And the reasons why I was really excited about this project is that we found a fort. It was called Fort Shackelford. And I'm working for the Seminoles. So think about this. This isn't about looking at a separate past where it's not connected to the people that are living there. This is a living present where the Seminoles were saying, we don't want you to dig up this fort. There are people there. This is disrespectful to our culture. What we want you to do is figure out, how do you use technology to prevent digging things up? So think about this. Archaeology, when you don't really think about it a lot, it's a destructive field of study. If you dig something out of the ground, it's never going to be the same way again. And so I sat down with my colleagues and we decided, let's bring in Esri. If you know what Esri is, it's GIS. That's long before we've been using GIS, but this is right in the beginning of that time period. And I said, we already use things like GIS for our work, which you actually see here. This is actually a GIS image of one of the reservations for the Seminoles, so we actually were using it already. And I said, there might be some other interesting ways that we can explore using technology. So we reached out to Esri and said, hey, what other things do you think you can help us with? So this is right at the time when you heard ground-penetrating radar. People know what that is now, but at 2006, 2007, it wasn't a really big thing that people had heard of. And so we said, could we bring in the people who are creating ground-penetrating radar? And can we actually use ground-penetrating radar to relocate Fort Shackelford and not dig? So we did this. We did an experimental study where we actually brought in experts. We brought in the person who created GPR Slice. We actually helped develop the software for interpreting ground-penetrating radar when I was at the Seminoles. And what we were actually able to do in this study, we never dug anything. We were able to relocate the fort, the people who were buried at the fort, and we were able to do this in a very respectful way. This changed my entire career. We actually won the top award that year in 2007 from Esri for creating innovations that include culture. And I realized that knowledge of being an interdisciplinarian, I could translate that into other fields and aspects of my life. And that's basically what I started to do ever since then. Now, I was really excited when I was talking to Dr. Hancock about some of the things that you're interested in, where it's fostering dialogue, expanding perspectives, cultivating thinkers. I'm really big into this, and if you look into me online, I call myself a happy hippie. It's because I really do want to bring culture together. It's one of the reasons why I am a lifelong learner. I want to learn about people. I would love to learn about all of you. I literally would sit down and talk to all of you. Because I think the more that we humble ourselves to experiences that other people have, the more that we can actually create things that really help people, which is really the goal that I have. And so oftentimes, I write a lot of theories and methods. So right before I was called to serve the Biden-Harris administration, I was at the RAND Corporation. If anybody is familiar with RAND, RAND was the think tank of the U.S. federal government. It was literally created in World War II to get us out of World War II. It's behind the scenes of a lot of things. If you watched Oppenheimer, that was the actual organization behind Oppenheimer. The internet was created dually with RAND. So if you think about that kind of thing, it's really meant to be big thinkers about big topics. And so I was called in to help RAND think about equity on a grand scale, so not in the US, but also abroad. And so there were different ways that I wanted to do that. So I literally just gave a presentation, and I mentioned that I'm speaking at the UN. Dr. Hancock mentioned this. My presentation next week is the intersection of AI and deliberative conversations. How do we use technology to actually get people speaking across intercultural lines using different languages, but using technology as a bridge rather than interjecting biases? So think about that. I'm actually right now about to publish a chapter that's a new methodology for how people can do that. These are the types of things that I try to really think about and grasp, and I love that TESU is doing those types of things where you're thinking about integrating new perspectives, bringing in different people to think about things in new ways, and creating new programs that are actually addressing the needs of the people in the workforce that we're trying to generate for the future. So I'm going to give you a few case studies. You can find a lot of writings. I have a problem. I write a lot. I just want you to know that. It's a problem. I'm always thinking about new articles. But I love to do studies where I bring in other people. So this is an interesting study that I did out of the Journal of Engaged Research, where it was between RAND, it was between SUNY, and it was between a couple of faculty that were now retired working internationally. And so in this study that we had, we wanted to find ways for people to engage students in interesting ways. So the other thing I'll tell you, I was a SUNY fellow in technology for 7 years. So in State University of New York, you can look up a bunch of presentations I've given how to make engaging online environments that aren't boring for students or faculty. And so I wanted to take all these presentations and put them into classroom settings. So I'm going to give you a few techniques that you can think about if you're dealing with students or even your colleagues. And we were talking about this at lunch. You know how we have kind of like discussion forums where you want people to engage and be interested in this. One of the things that I used to do with students is one of my questions, I always said, provide me with your own resources that maybe you actually think address your knowledge better. Maybe this article that I provided you is too and it doesn't actually get to what you want to learn. And they did. And one of the things that I did is I created new reading lists, and I gave credit to all my students, and I gave them the year that they did it. And each year, my courses would actually change with their reading materials. I sometimes removed my reading materials and put theirs in. And so this was an example that we were looking in this article about how do we create equity-centered. Think about that concept of a professor where it's like that sage on a stage, they know everything, and a student may not. But think about your own environment. You have adult learners. You have people that are students that have had 20, 30, 40-year careers. And to assume that these individuals don't know anything is kind of a bit of a misnomer. And so I worked at a couple of institutions myself where they were adult-centered students, and I could learn just as much from them and the expertise that they brought into the classroom that they could learn from me. And so the other things that we also did too is I worked a lot internationally. So I told you I taught in Lebanon, and I was telling everyone at lunch that our Lebanese students at home, they're speaking Arabic. In school, because it was a French territory, they were speaking French. And if they didn't make it into a French university, they went to an American university. So just think about that. That means that they are speaking in a college-level environment, potentially their third language. And one of the reasons I thought this was so important is just think about if you have a U.S. student who may be first language learner and that's it. They may not have a second language. I wanted to create an environment where my students that were in Lebanon speaking their third language could engage with a first language English speaker. So very early on, I said that you can use Google Translate in classes. I put it into my syllabus. Because think about what that means. Somebody could be doing it without telling you, but somebody then knows that it's okay. They're more likely going to not try to cheat. They're going to use it because they know that it helps them translate what they're saying. And then I'm focusing on their content rather than focusing on their inability to speak in a third language. And so these little tricks that we talked about in this article were really helpful as showing ways of really engaging others. This is a second case study. This book just came out from Routledge in 2023, where I wanted to look at that previous article, but I wanted to take it a step further, where we had scholars, so my colleagues who wrote this article were in different countries. So we had somebody from Italy, somebody from Honduras, somebody from the United States, and at the time I was at Rand. And we wanted to look at how do we take the model that I had mentioned in the last article, and could we apply it more broadly? And we found we could. And what was really exciting is now with the introduction of AI, in addition to using things like Google Scholar, we could also use AI as a form of translation, a good example. And I encourage my students to do this. There could be complex words. Think about the concept of interdisciplinary. I'm going to go back to my Lebanese students. How difficult do you think it would be to explain that if that's your third language? But I told them, go online. Go online, go to ChatGPT, look up interdisciplinary, translate it into Arabic, then go either through Google Translate or ChatGPT and translate it back. Let's share the definitions that you're producing in each of your countries. The reason that was interesting is think about this. AI is trained on data models, which means the data model from their countries is going to come up with something slightly different. And so this became an opportunity for learning as well, where people were not only using technology in order to lower barriers, but they were also using technology in ways to talk about what their regional learning was based on the data that was used. And so this in and of itself became an assignment for them to think about, right? They were actually able to say like, oh, my country doesn't use these particular words. They're banned. And I'll be quite honest, in the southern part of Lebanon, there were a lot of banned words that weren't popping up that will pop up regularly in US-trained learning models. So it was really interesting when you think about those type of examples. Now, I will tell you I'm very big about implementation, so I'm not just about studies. I like to close the circle. So after I realized that these case studies were really working, I reached out to Brandeis University, and I helped Brandeis University set up its first ever racial justice tech policy program. So they're the first college in the country that has actually done the stuff that I've been doing now for the last 20 years, which is combining culture and technology. And they wanted me to come in, so for a year, this was about between 2019 and 2020, that I helped behind the scenes them set up this program. And what was really interesting about the findings, and we'll go into this, is what we learned about the early adoption of artificial intelligence. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. I mean, I have, sadly, a lot of NDAs, but this one has actually now finally released me. So Google has a think tank behind it called X, and X is what invented what we now call Gemini. I was on the team that helped invent Gemini, which is the equal product towards ChatGPT. I will tell you the reason why I chose to work on Gemini versus ChatGPT. For those of you who don't know this, ChatGPT was trained on Wikipedia. Gemini is trained on Google. Just think about the difference. Google controls 80% of the world's internet, And so as a person who cares about culture, I knew long-term that was going to be more powerful and that it was going to have longer stayability because it's supported by Google. If Google chose to, it could push ChatGPT out. It hasn't done that yet, but FYI, if you noticed during the Super Bowl, it introduced itself in the Super Bowl as Gemini for the first time. So it's starting to happen. This is part of this kind of future studies conversations I'm involved in, is I want to make sure that things that can be really good or really bad for people have oversight from people who are thinking about things in different ways. And so I'm going to go through some of this really quickly because I don't know where you are with your understanding of AI. And I think it's really important for us to think about what artificial intelligence is and the kind of components that make it up. But one of the biggest things that people need to know about AI is that it's based on learning models. So it's based on data. As I just mentioned to you, let's take ChatGPT, which most people are familiar with. It was trained originally on Wikipedia. And the way that it was trained was using math, not the actual words of Wikipedia. It was converted into numbers. And those numbers use what we call algorithms, for mathematicians who are in the room, these are mathematical equations. And so everything that you see in ChatGPT goes through a multi-level process where it takes, let's say if it's a word or an image, and it converts it into numbers, and then it converts those words and images from numbers back into whatever text it's producing. There's a lot that can go wrong if that happens. That's why I wanted you to think about this. If you're creating a mathematical equation and you have biases and you're not thinking about different groups, your mathematical equation can rule out things instantly. And you're going to see that in some of my examples. But if you think early on about the development of your algorithms and mathematical equations, you won't have those same issues, which is the reason why one of the last things that I'm doing as my term comes to an end at the Biden-Harris administration, you can look this up, was I sat on the AI Developmental Task Force for Treasury. We just released our strategic plan for how to make sure that AI doesn't do things harmful to society. And so it's published. All you have to do is just go to Treasury and you can take a look at that AI document. Now, the other thing, too, I want you to think about, besides kind of traditional AI, where it looks at kind of a narrow task, we also have predictive models. This is another space where you can have potential problems, where if a predictive model is using a mathematical equation, it will automatically exclude details because it's predicting something. It's making an educated guess. And those educated guesses, if they aren't being verified or vetted by humans, can be good or bad. And so that's one of those reasons why I just finished this certificate training with Princeton. And one of the biggest things that most of the scholars were saying at Princeton is like, we're not at a phase right now where we should trust AI independently. We have to have checks and balances in place because some of that information is inaccurate. I'm going to give you an example. I did a study at Rand where we were working on building a literature review around children, youth, and well-being. And I said, pull some resources for me, and I would like to see kind of some citations from around the globe. So I get these resources, and in a prompt I ask, are these real resources? And ChatGPT gave me so much like sass. Like it said, if you really want real resources, you should have conducted your own literature review. I was like, whoa. Tone it down, ChatGPT. One of my friends actually wrote an article that said, be nice to ChatGPT, so it'll be nice to you. Because it's feisty. I mean, play with it. It's very funny. But don't be too mean to it because it will give you wrong data. It's a learning algorithm. So if you put, and this is the other thing I'm going to tell you at Rand, we were looking at things on the dark web. If you put bad things into it, remember, it's technology. It will take good, it will take bad, and it will pump it back out to you. It's one of those reasons why we see in various things, like you may have seen this in like very recent headlines where a girl had a picture on her CV and she happened to be of Asian descent and said, please modify my CV to make it better, and it changed her from being Asian to white. And that was the algorithm. The algorithm took the data and all of our biases as human beings and input it into the algorithm and told her that she needed to change who she was in order to get it better. These are things that are happening regularly. And these are things why I said it's very important how we're training our models. I will give you this as an example. When Rand realized this and at Treasury, we actually brought a version of ChatGPT into our own servers so that we would be training the algorithms on our information only. And as researchers, because we had an ethical compass, it wasn't interjecting some of the things that you found on the general web. So if you're using things like Gemini or ChatGPT, I want you to be really cognizant of this. They are using everything on the web, good or bad. And so what you need to think about is the answers that you're getting. That's why it now says, because this actually came from government, like people like me, if you read in the small print, it says, please read this, it may be inaccurate. Please do, because it may be inaccurate, and you could be pumping out information that's not real. The other thing I want you to know that I've been working a lot with is kind of generative AI, and generative AI, as you heard, are these things like deep fakes. They come from deep learning. One of the things, and you'll see this later on in the slide, is I've been really involved with creating ethics at the White House level. So I sit on a lot of White House councils right now, and the White House just released a best practices in AI. And I would strongly take a look at that. It brought together some of the leading experts from around the world to think about what are some issues we should be thinking about now, not later, as we start thinking about adopting things. And it's important because right now, leading experts are predicting by 2050, some of these algorithmic models will be training themselves independent of people. And that could be really problematic if we're not thinking about it now. Now, I'm going to go into this a little bit more quickly about generative AI because I want you to think about, what is all of this buzz about? And there's a lot of good things that come from generative AI. You can automate tasks, you can analyze data, you can have supports. We have a lot of those chat bots which actually use generative AI. I know a lot of colleges and universities are taking those in. So they can be helpful for low-level tasks, but you also still have to check them. So I would say if you're not checking what your information is producing, you should be surveying your students and their interaction with it, because you can ask whoever it is that you're working with to generate your chatbots to make adjustments. This is one of the biggest things that we are saying at the federal level right now. Do not turn over all of your authority to third-party hosts who are developing these softwares, and don't not ask them questions about how they're using that data. We've also, working with Princeton, you can take a look and reach out to me afterward. We created, because we know a lot of people don't know the right questions to ask, a list of questions to ask. And these are things you really should be doing. You shouldn't just trust the technology or the technological providers are going to do things that are betterment of you and your students. They could be doing it for the betterment of collecting data. I was just reading, because I'm really into this world. Yesterday, somebody went on LinkedIn and they were really shocked that Grammarly was collecting all of their data for their development of a new AI. They are. FYI, if you use Grammarly, you should go into your settings and you should turn off, I do not want to use my data for training your AI. You should turn it off. Because here's the reason why. When something goes into the system, you could be writing this beautiful book and you could put it in there. Guess what? That book is now in the AI. This is the big thing about what happens if somebody publishes a college paper that takes your book that you haven't published yet. These are things about intellectual property that we should be thinking about now and protecting ourselves now. There's a bunch of smart people in this room. And we can think about things that we thought in traditional academia. We should be thinking the same way in this new age of academia that's incorporating technology. Now, I highlighted what is called hallucinations, which is when ChatGPT was feisty to me. But there are some other things that we should pay attention to. Security right now. I'll tell you, I was in this meeting. As you can imagine, Treasury is being bombarded by people who are trying to sell AI to us, like bombarded. Like companies I have never heard of in my life are coming out of the woodwork and we're like, we have the best product for you. And I'm like, I don't know who you are. And they'll say things like, we can do this and that. And I said, okay, great. Where's the data stored? Oh, it's secure. I'm like, no. Where's the data stored? Because you're asking for the Department of Treasury, which hosts the U.S.'s money, to turn over its data to you, and you can't explain to us where you're storing it. That's national security. And they're like, well, no one's asked us that question. I said, that's tough, because we're going to ask you that question. And that's all the things you should be asking yourselves. The other thing, too, I would say is, this goes into that lack of control, but also the lack of expertise. There's a big push that we're doing at the national and federal level that we're training up individuals who are already in the government to learn these things. That's the reason I just mentioned to you, we just had this training for all federal officials with Princeton. We had one last year with Stanford. I just completed another one with IBM. We're taking the effort to get our senior leaders to understand the technology because we can't ignore it. Imagine what happened, and we were all experiencing this, I was a professor at the time, when COVID happened, and then technology hit us in the face. There were some people who tried to ignore it, and it made their life so difficult trying to transition. Right now, we actually have some time. Let's not make our own lives difficult by ignoring that this is coming. because we can protect ourselves and our students in better ways. Now, I mentioned a couple, and I'm going to actually go forward on this slide because I want to show you this. This is an example of generative AI. The image that you actually see here below was generated by OpenAI's DALL-E E2. What basically happened is the prompt was put in, and it said, a seemingly endless view of African workers at desk in front of computer screen in printmaking style. And in addition to that, it also said, if you see on the screen, OpenAI used Kenyan workers on less than $2 per hour to make ChatGPT less toxic. Now look at this image, which is a computer-generated image of these two prompts. It makes it seem like the Kenyan workers were having a great time. It doesn't make it seem like the Kenyan workers were making $2 a day. In reality, this image is very different from the reality of the working situation of the Kenyan workers. And so the reason I wanted to show you this as an example is think about it. These two statements were put in. This is the product that you receive in return, which is not an accurate portrayal of the reality of those workers. That's why it's so important for us to be able to think about and check on what it is that we're looking at. Now, this leaves us with some unanswered questions, and as we get to the QA, I will definitely answer all of your questions. But, you know, who determines AI outputs? Are they suitable? Are they correct? Are they free from harm? What mechanisms are in place to check AI outputs? The black box effect, and I will tell you what that is. Right now, leading experts, even at Princeton, because the generation of algorithms is so rapid, it's like 0.001 seconds, the leading experts right now say, we don't understand how the machines are creating some of these answers. That's the black box effect. That's what that means. So think about what that actually means. If the leading experts and AI researcher cannot take apart the data, then we don't actually know how this information is working. They're actually trying to develop new algorithms right now to uncouple that information because it's working so fast that our minds can't actually work that fast. That could not be a good thing because we don't know what the machines are generating because they don't have a moral compass. And so those are the things that I think are really important and why I'm highlighting this slide here. Oftentimes people are thinking that AI is going to replace humans, and I would say, please don't. Please don't let AI replace human work and have it unchecked. We are not at a point right now where AI has been trained on enough data that's equitable for us to 100% trust its outputs. We're not there yet. And so this is the reason why this kind of hybrid model, which you see in the middle of the slide, builds off of the strengths of humans and builds off of the strengths of AI. Because we need the checks and balances in place in order to make sure that those outputs are not harmful. Now, I wanted to show this to you. I think it's a little bit difficult to read, so I'm going to kind of read it myself to you. But I've given over this presentation. You can have a copy of it. But my colleagues at RAND, in RAND Europe, developed a really nice methodology. I like methods. I like those step processes that you can do. And what they've done is they've said, like, if you really want to make an agile, linked-up ecosystem that really thinks about people, you should do 6 steps. The first step is to innovate and anticipate, so what I've just described to you, to think about the human elements, to think about the hybrid elements. You should monitor and discover. You should analyze and understand. So you should take pauses, like I said about surveying students about, let's say, a chatbot. Don't just assume it's doing well. Ask. You should then take that information and communicate what you found, right? So tell people, we found that this one is working, we're going to continue to do this. This one is not working, we're going to stop doing this. And then you should use that to evaluate what you're doing. You know, I always talk about this, and if you hear other presentations of mine later, accepting information or creating new technologies just for the sake of creating technologies is not useful for anyone. It could waste a lot of money, it could waste a lot of time. And so creating a method, even if you want to modify this method, it allows you to be able to verify what you're doing is actually helping people rather than assuming it is. Now, there's a couple final slides that I'll go through, but I'm going to go through this one really quickly. If you get a chance, that's what I was mentioning at the White House. These are a couple of reports that really help us think about AI. The last one coming out from the White House, which is the Guidance to Advancing Governance in AI. It really is a great report because it lays out details of things that you can do as you're adopting these methodologies. Now, to get to the fun part. How do we make a difference in technology? The biggest things I would say to all of you is you don't have to learn this information on your own. There's a lot of people out there like myself, and I'm not joking. If you email me, I will respond to you. And I will send you whatever it is that you're asking for. There's a community of people who consider themselves open scholars, and I've a long time been a part of that open community. I think if we're all going to improve in this area, even if somebody is technophobic or if somebody is digitally literate, all of us have to have some of an understanding because it's going to impact us. And I think, if you're thinking about this, and this is really tiny, so I'm definitely not going to read it, but these are actual mitigation strategies that we pulled out in the report. So if you get this, I will actually share this with you, and you can see those. There's too many of them, but I wanted to make sure you had it in a presentation. But I wanted to highlight something, because I was just giving a presentation to the Maryland Board for Community College, which we know community colleges have a lot of students. And a faculty member stood up, and I thought this was a great question. She said, I'm struggling right now knowing if AI is writing all these papers. And she's like, do you have any strategies to help me? And I asked her, I said, have you changed any of the ways that you've been teaching for the last 15 years, in the last 10? No. And I said, well, if you're providing your students with a term paper, they can just take what your term paper is and put it into ChatGPT, and there's going to be a generated paper. What I recommend that people do is they create papers that are divided throughout the semester. A good way of doing that is if you take a paper and each part of that paper has to be reviewed by another student in class, and those student comments have to be incorporated in, it makes it a lot harder for something to be able to be generated in AI. So my term papers are broken into 5 pieces, each with notes from students that are in that class. So that way, students never know who that student is, and it's not the same student each time. And it prevents you from being able to generate something, because I have to tell you, because I do this all the time, because I check, you should also check, is if you put in different people's feedback, it corrupts your paper. Because it tries to mix together your content, the previous person's content, and all the new people's content. So it looks like gibberish, right? So it makes it easier. Do not tell all of your students. I know that there's a student back. Do not tell your students that secret. But the final thing that I would say is AI tools really do have great potential to revolutionize many industries, but they also come currently with a lot of limitations and concerns. It's crucial that all of us have some form of digital literacy in order for us to make a workforce that's engaged and knowledgeable. We all need to join in the development of these tools. We shouldn't be waiting for third parties to develop them independently, because we need to have oversight. We are the end users, and so we should be involved in the development. We have a stake in this. We want to know where our information is going. And I think that is probably the biggest reason that I'm doing this. As you can see, I really am passionate about it. But I wanted to say overall, thank you for letting me have this conversation with you, and I look forward to questions. Sure.
Real fast, we've been looking at our policies. And I didn't think about this upstairs at lunch. And one of the things we're trying to figure out is, your policies discriminate. How are they translated, usable, and supported for everybody? So how might you use AI, knowing that you have a good sense of academic policies? Is there a way to maybe use AI to test your policies and how effectively they serve your diverse population?
That's a great question. So I'm going to repeat this for people online. So how can you use AI in order to vet or verify policy? I think that's a great question. Actually, it was one of the first case studies the federal government did. We wanted to actually look at samples of policy development and policies in place in order to see if they were biased in some way. Now, I will tell you, the case studies that they did, we actually trained them on algorithms that were owned by the federal government because of top secret clearance. So that also changes the inputs that were put in. So it was a lot easier to verify if the outcomes were accurate. When you don't have a version of AI, let's say, in your institution, one thing that I would encourage is, yes, you can use external platforms for ChatGPT and those things, but you do want to have experts who have institutional history to look over the output. And that would be something really critical, because it can speed up your process. We did find that even with using some of these external versions. But I'll give you an example, because I can't tell you all the policies of the government, but I'll give you an example of the Department of Education. It was looking at ADA compliance, and it pulled this up. And there are certain things that are externally facing of ADA compliance, and then there's actually top secret and secret information that is not released. And so if we would have just used what was on the external ChatGPT, they're not aware of any of the internal documents. So that's the other thing I'd say to you is if your internal documents, your institutional history isn't in the actual algorithm, then you need somebody on your staff that understands those documents to make sure that things aren't left out. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Hello. Thank you. Wonderful presentation. I appreciate that. One thing really stuck out to me about your presentation when you talk about image development. I've gone on, created images using artificial intelligence. I've noticed that I can put in one phrase or two phrases, and I can generate about 20 different images off of the same words. And then, you can fine-tune it and things like that. But I thought it was very interesting when you said that there are algorithms trying to figure out where they're obtaining the data from. Yeah, and I think it's you pointed that out is very key because the artificial intelligence continues to get smarter, but when we're not aware of what's being fed into it, and if it's coming from generally anywhere on the internet, garbage in, garbage comes out. Yeah, so I think that's something that's very key when we look at policies for ourselves as an academic institution or just for how we serve the general public. That was more of a comment than a question.
Yeah. Well, no, I appreciate it. I think, so I'll give you an example. There's a lot of software out there that can generate images, and I think they're really exciting. The big thing that I would say about this image generation is it's only coming from places who have high algorithmic knowledge. So you're not going to, I'll give you an example of one of the reasons people are struggling, especially in the artistic community, is let's say that you're an artisan coming from an underprivileged part of the world. Those images are never going to make it into the AI algorithm because they're not being programmed into the AI algorithm. Which means if we're not being cognizant of this, we're going to have the most technologically advanced countries influencing our images if we only go to those types of images. And so that would be a concern. Imagine 25 years from now. What is art? Is it only those things that are supported by technology? That's the reason why this kind of human element of us, I have to tell you, I'm an artist. My archaeology background, I'm a ceramicist. So I make art. You can look that up. I do it all the time. It's a good outlet. But imagine if that wouldn't be considered art. Nobody's uploading my ceramics into imagery right now. And that means that that style could disappear. And so this is why I'm saying we don't want to turn over our authority 100% to AI, because we could lose some uniqueness and innovation that exists within humanity overall. I thought there was a question here. Yeah.
So in your keynote, you highlighted the dual potential. Sorry. So in your keynote, you highlighted the dual potential of technology as both a driver of innovation, but also it can be of inequity. So how can institutions like Thomas Edison effectively balance these two forces while implementing new technologies?
I think that's great. And I think it's one of those reasons I keep mentioning this hybrid model. You should be bringing in your subject matter experts. And I have to say, there's not just the subject experts of the content that you're trying to use technology for, but also the subject matter managers and subject matter experts of the technology itself. Oftentimes what I've seen when I go into kind of consulting situations is people will turn over the authority of the technology to the subject matter experts, and they will work in a vacuum, just like the subject matter experts of the content will work in a vacuum. And that's really problematic because oftentimes what we'll see, and I'll say this is happening in the federal government, which it's forced some of these third-party companies to rethink their process. They invent these programs, and then they bring it to us and try to sell it to us, never once considering our needs. And so what we've basically said is, if you want to work with the federal government, you have to give us the opportunity to work with you on those technologies. Higher education institutions have that same authority. I mean, we did this at RAND, where we actually worked with ChatGPT, and they were like, we're going to give you this prefab model. And we were like, no, you're not. We're like, we have top secret and secret clearance things. We're not going to just put this stuff here. Like you, if you want our business, we are going to work with you. What's been sad for me is sometimes people don't empower themselves to do that as the subject matter experts. They just turn that authority over. So I would encourage all of you, you are the subject matter experts. Don't turn over that authority and allow these kind of third-party groups that you're working with to tell you what you need. It should be mutually reciprocal.
Thank you. It's been wonderful. Question for you about the role of technology and the handing over of a person's power to the technology. Just finished reading Ray Bradbury's book, The Illustrated Man, with my son in 9th grade, and we were discussing the Welt. Mm-hmm. And I said, when the story was written, this was totally a foreign idea. Now, it's true. People are, probably aware of it, but it's the idea that these children have any ideas in their mind. They are aligned with a computer system in the house, and the computer system brings it to life. Mm-hmm. How close do you think we are to something like that in reality, and how are we as a society going to ensure that we maintain separateness from the computers and the technology?
I think we have to be deliberate, and thank you for that question, because I think oftentimes, and let's be really transparent here, we've been turning over our power to technology ever since the telephone. This is just another progression in the technological revolution. My concern is as we've given up more power to the telephone, to computers, to social media, to the internet, all of those types of things, we have to pause as humanity and say that we shouldn't be doing this. If we continue down a path that keeps turning over the power, then there's going to be problems. But you can also, on an individual level, help support that in your households, in your classrooms. And I'll give you an example of this. When I go back to using, Google Translate, which also is based on algorithms, everything is moving towards AI. I tell my students, whatever you're putting in is going to be something that's no longer your intellectual property. Whatever you're turning in is going to be informing a greater populace. Is that what you want to do? You can, but just keep that in mind. And if you do that, keep in mind that the outputs you should pay attention to. So I actually now have assignments where I say, go check multiple AI platforms, see what it generates. What are the outputs? They're not always the same. They're actually very different. That piece of what I'm describing is we need to do a better job of being critical thinkers. And not just saying, here's this technology, I'm going to use it, but really thinking about it and challenging the technology and challenging the people around us who are using the technology to really critically think about it. So like as a parent, when you said with your son, challenge him that. Make them watch The Matrix. Do you want that as your future? Ask them those questions, right? And that helps people think in different ways.
We have time for 2 more questions. Any more? Over here. Whose hand was up?
Well, for the people online. Yeah.
Online.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Can't forget them. Thank you very much. I am curious, do you think that we can teach AI morality or ethics? And then as a piggyback to that, is it more important to teach the systems, or is it more important for the end users to use it in an ethical way?
I think that's a great question, and I think it's difficult to say it has to be one or the other. One of the reasons why is that AI and the algorithms were developed without ethics in mind. So they already exist. So one of the things now is we have to go back, and that's why you see a lot of those things like AI ethics being generated now. I wish that it would have started with them, but they haven't. And the other part, and then I'll tell you a side story, the other part is the end users have more responsibility to push ethics onto these systems because they weren't incorporated in the beginning, which is the reason why you had things. I'll give you another example that was a huge lawsuit. People, you know how there's those new face examining when you go through, I just flew on a plane here. One of the leading experts at Princeton, he's a man of Indian descent, and he said that he was in that system and it identified him as someone from the Middle East, and he was detained from coming to his presentation for us because it misidentified his skin tone. And he helped invent that software. And he was pulled aside, and he had all these things, and he's explaining them. He's like, I invented this software. Has anybody actually vetted this material? How many times have you actually documented that this has happened? And the person who was like the head of the, this was in LaGuardia, he came and he's like, we're just going to let you go. But think about that. Like, he was able to get out of this because he helped create this. But here's the problem, is that these things exist. They weren't based on ethics. They make broad generalizations about skin tone. They make broad generalizations about appearances. I'll give you an example of myself. I told you that I'm multiracial. My mom literally, I speak German because my mom is Pennsylvania Dutch. Her family is Amish. My dad's family is Cajun Creole. There is nothing in me over 50%. However, if you put me in front of a machine, it's probably going to call me African American Black. It's not going to denote all the things that make me up. And so those are concerns. Good example. Right now in the census, the largest growing population of Americans are interracial. What does that mean in 25 years if we turn this all over to technology? Are we going to misidentify 50% of our population? Those are the things that we want to be thinking about now. I think if we do that, we have the ability to slow things down. And this is one of the reasons I'm so involved in it, is at the federal level, is I want to make sure that those ethics are incorporated. If you don't have ethics here, everyone, you should build an AI ethics. That should be something you should think about. Technology.
This was AI generated, yes. It might have worked. Thank you for your time. Just had a question. You mentioned oversight and vetting of AI outcomes is going to be crucial to us using it effectively. I'm just wondering, how do we establish who's overseeing or vetting the content of these outputs? Obviously, we know humans have their own biases. Would it be a committee? Do we trust government committees to oversee? So how do we? Who is the arbiter of truth with these outputs? How do you see that?
Yeah, I don't think one individual should be given authority. That's the reason why even at the federal government, we have a committee inside of Treasury that's made up of 50 people who built the AI infrastructure. And we intentionally pulled from all departments because we wanted to make sure that we had the mixture of technological experts as well as subject matter experts for different ways that was interacting. The other piece that we did too, which I would strongly recommend, is we did case studies. So right now, the Treasury, you may have seen this, the Treasury just released, I think a few months ago, the Deputy Secretary said that we just saved upwards of $1 trillion in tax fraud because we had a study going on for the last 2 years, which we were doing it behind the scenes to check. But that was one of the case studies. We have 275 case studies going on for the last 2 years in different fields. So in addition to having that committee, we also asked people inside of the organization to bring up case studies and to actually run these case studies. So it's a pyramid of individuals that are overseeing the ethics and what ultimately led over the last 2 years into the development of this guiding document for ethics. So I would encourage all of you, if you're thinking about AI, the first thing that you should do, put together a committee. The second thing you should do little mini case studies. See which things work. See which things are effective. Don't continue doing the ones that aren't effective. Do the ones that you do. Pull that information together. Share it back with your committee. And then you can build something as a formalized framework to operate from.
Thanks so much, Dr. Rogers. This concludes the question and answer portion of the talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rogers. We're going to invite Adam to close it out for us.
Good afternoon. I'm Adam Eisenstadt. I'm an assistant dean in the School of Science and Technology and chair of the AI task force. I want to thank Dr. Rogers for her inspiring and very thought-provoking presentation that has provided us with some invaluable insights into how technology can serve as both a catalyst for innovation and also a source of inequity. Her reflections on digital equity, AI, public policy, and education underscores the complexities and opportunities we navigate in our field. The case studies that she shared not only highlighted the transformative power of interdisciplinary approaches, but also emphasize the importance of leveraging technology ethically and effectively in higher education. Dr. Rogers' presentation aligns closely with the mission of the AI task force that we have at the university. Our role is to provide guidance and support in the use of AI technologies across university operations, ensuring they align with TSU's mission and values, and also for our students. Like Dr. Rogers, we are committed to balancing innovation with responsibility, using technology to enhance student success, optimize institutional efficiency, and uphold fairness and inclusivity in all our initiatives. Today's event also provides an opportunity to spotlight another meaningful initiative. It's my pleasure to introduce Mary Hegley, Vice President for Advancement and Executive Vice President for the TSU Foundation, who will share details about our annual Day of Giving. This event serves as a vital opportunity for our community to come together in support of initiatives that foster innovation, growth, and excellence at Thomas Edison State University. Once again, thank you, Dr. Rogers, for sharing your insights and setting the stage for today's discussion. And now please join me in welcoming Mary.